This is an ABC News special report.
Let's bring in counselor to the president and one of his top advisors, Kellyanne Conway. Her voice among those advising Donald Trump as he decides whether to reject Roy Moore. And good morning, Kellyanne. The Washington Post story is now 3 days old. You've had time to digest it, time to look through it. Do you have any doubt about the veracity of those accusations?
I said very early in this process that the conduct as described should disqualify anyone from serving in public office, and I'll stand by that. The president and others in the Republican Party have made clear that if the allegations are true, this man should step aside. But I've gone farther than that, and I've reflected something the vice president said as well, which is everybody should know that conduct is disqualifying. And Mr. Moore has denied that conduct. I think you've got other people out there talking about what did or did not happen many years ago.
But that goes back to that if we prove this conduct, then he should leave. What is it that has to happen now for you to go into he should step aside?
Well, the one thing I will say is that the president also is not as focused on this as he is his major 13-day trip abroad. And so he made a statement, he's sticking by that statement, but he's not being briefed on this bit by bit because he is very focused on new trade agreements. He's very focused on global cooperation against a nuclearized North Korea. He's very focused on combating terrorism.
And we'll get to that. And we'll get back to that. But let me ask you again, do you have any doubt about the veracity of the accusation?
Martha, I only know what I read, and I take very seriously allegations like this, particularly when they involve somebody who happens to be one of my daughter's ages. I take this seriously. I've tried to be a very loud voice for a very long time.
So you believe the accusers?
Sexual impropriety. I know what I read. I don't know the accusers, and I don't know Judge Moore. But I also want to make sure that we as a nation are not always prosecuting people through the press. He has denied the allegations. I've read the stories. I've heard not the testimony and the evidence, but what people are saying publicly. And I think that what we've all said stands. I came out I was probably the first person in the administration to come out because I happened to be interviewed on a different network about a different topic, tax cuts. And I said, this conduct should be disqualifying. I mean, I look around and I say, is this the best we can do?
But we're still, I mean, Roy Moore says that, too, that conduct like that should be disqualifying. He's just saying he didn't do it. So what's the standard of proof here? It's one thing to say this is terrible conduct. It is terrible conduct. I'm not sure anyone would disagree with you. But the question is, and you are an advisor to the president, you have been following this. What is your standard of proof here? I mean, you either believe the women or you don't. And this isn't a trial.
Well, you said it best. It's not a trial. What do you mean the standard of proof and the evidence?
I mean, what does it take for you to say he should resign? What has to happen before you would advise the president to say Roy Moore should step aside?
The president said he should step aside if the allegations are true.
So where does the if lie?
But Martha, hold on. I want to broaden this conversation. It would be a very dangerous precedent for any of us, for any person in this country, to just be cast aside as guilty because of press reports. This is a democracy with a constitutional system that allows us to have a process. So if we're not in trial here, I only know what I read, and what I read is very disturbing, and what I read offends me greatly as a woman, as a mother of 3 young girls.
Understood, but what you're saying essentially is maybe those 4 women are lying?
No, I didn't say that.
We had 4 women who the Post
Martha,
came to.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Okay, I didn't say that. But I also know that credibility has not been imbued on other people when they've tried to raise issues like this based on their political affiliations and based on who they work for. And we know that. There were many accusers over the years. There was much evidence against a former president and very little coverage of that, respectfully. The fact is that on this particular issue, we need to have a serious conversation. But on this one, you're talking about decades-long conduct, allegations in the press. And we already in this conversation have probably spent more time talking about Roy Moore and this than we've talked about a Democratic United States senator who's sitting in a federal courthouse as a criminal defendant in a trial, has been indicted on some serious criminal counts, and we can't get any coverage on it.
And we will be talking about that.
I want to be very clear. I want to be very explicit here. I denounce that conduct. And if the allegations are true, he should step aside. And if the allegations are true about a lot of people, they ought to step aside. And some of them are probably holding office right now.
Let me tell you what Mitt Romney tweeted this Friday. He said, "Innocent until proven guilty is for criminal convictions, not elections. I believe Lee Corfman. Her account is too serious to ignore. Moore is unfit for office and should step aside." So let me ask you one more question on this. Do you believe Lee Corfman?
I don't know Lee Corfman. I believe that both sides are alleging different things. You're asking me.
So that means it goes nowhere.
No, that's not true. That is not true.
How does it
you're
go
also
somewhere?
asking me on behalf of the White House and the president to make a judgment about something when he's on a 13-day trip and spoke very explicitly, as has the vice president, as have I, and as have other top advisors. Let me say it one last time. The conduct as described is not just offensive and disgusting. It disqualifies anyone who's done it from holding public office. So let me go a little step farther. If there's anyone currently in public office who's behaved that way to any girl or any woman, maybe they should step aside, because in a country of 330 million people, we ought to be able to do better than this. I tried to raise this issue a year ago on October 9th. I said explicitly that I had been a victim of people in power, and nobody took me seriously. And you know why? Because of who I worked for, of whose campaign I was managing. I tried to have this conversation a year before everybody else. You want to have this conversation, everybody? Let's have it, but let's be honest about it. It goes far beyond one article in a newspaper. It's in most workplaces.
Let me just, I want to move on to Russia, Kellyanne, but let me say again, there are 4 women who were named and 30 witnesses corroborating it. And
they should have their day. They should speak up.
I think they did speak up.
Right. They should speak up, and they should have their day. The rest of it, you're asking me about political strategy and ballot access in the state of Alabama. That's up to Alabama. I cannot emphatically say enough what I think of the conduct. It's hard to even read these articles.
I know, but you also can't say whether you believe the accusers or not. You just can't. You're not going to go that far. So let's move on to Russia. I want to get some clarity on President Trump's position on Russia and election interference. He said Saturday on Air Force One that every time he sees Vladimir Putin, Putin says, "I didn't do that." And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. He tried to clarify that in a press conference overnight. Let's listen.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership. I believe in our intel agencies, our intelligence agencies.
Those two statements seem to contradict each other. Which is it?
No, it's what I can't imagine the president could be more explicit. He said yesterday, as he said today, that when President Putin says it, President Putin means it. He means that they didn't interfere in the election. What the president said
so
is
he
that
thinks he's just delusional, President Putin?
No, he didn't use that word. He said that President Putin believes it. What the president believes is what's most important here. He believes the assessment of the intelligence communities, and he stands by that. He's very respectful of that. Director Pompeo of the CIA said the same thing. And so this president has formed his judgment about that issue based on the intelligence communities in this country. And he also, the president is not the chairman of the Board of Elections in this country. He's the president of the United States. He wants to deal with President Putin and other world leaders, as he is for 2 weeks right now, Martha, on major issues like global security, on trade, perhaps, in other countries, on combating ISIS, on a nuclearized North Korea. Most Americans watching this show and everywhere in this country right now appreciate having a strong leader who's willing to take his counsel from along with the international community and put the case right to North Korea and say to Putin and say to Xi and say to Abiy and say to others, Moon, join with us in making sure the nuclearized North Korea.
Let's talk about what
contained.
else he said about North Korea. President Trump tweeted this yesterday from Vietnam. "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat," which is apparently trending on Twitter right now. "Oh, well, I tried so hard to be his friend." And maybe someday that will happen. How is that helpful?
I think the whole trip is very helpful. I believe that you have to ask the leader of North Korea.
How is that helpful?
Martha, what's helpful in full context is a 13-day trip where the president is very focused on global security and combating terrorism, and most importantly, containing a nuclearized North Korea. North Korea is everyone's business. This man's been on the job for 9 or 10 months. We inherited a mess, including a nuclearized North Korea, including the Iran deal, including many hotspots around the globe that he is trying, when he's here at his desk and when he's abroad on these trips, he's trying to make better on behalf of everyone.
And you think name calling is helpful?
I
Calling
think
somebody short and fat?
I think that was the president just responding the way he does to somebody who insulted him first. But I look at the full context of his entire trip and everything that he's trying to do. I think it's been an incredibly successful and inspiring trip for those who care about North Korea not being nuclearized, for those who care about free trade in this country, for those who care about trade agreements that don't keep screwing Americans and American workers, for those who care about Syria and what happens with China. I mean, what this president's been able to do with leaders around the world, the cooperation is up. They've announced big new deals here, which affect American workers and American interests. And that plus the tax cut that we're going to get very soon, I think it's why you see the stock market and consumer confidence at all-time highs. People like what they see.
Okay, thanks very much,
Thank you
for joining us.
This is an ABC News special report.
Back now with the roundtable, and Mary, I'm going to start with you and all of you. Kind of a lightning round here, but Tuesday's elections. I want your take on Tuesday's election. Was it a referendum on Donald Trump, or was it a compelling message from the Democrats?
This was absolutely about Donald Trump. There's no mistaking it, especially in Virginia. When you look at the breakdown here, 1 in 3 voters in Virginia came out saying they were casting a ballot to protest the president. The Republican Ed Gillespie tried to have it both ways. He tried to appeal to the establishment. He tried to embrace Trumpism, and it backfired. But for Democrats who right now are gleeful and celebrating, looking for that anti-Trump wave, they should be cautiously optimistic. They are still going to have to give voters something to vote for. Just counting on voters coming out against Trump may not work everywhere, especially in states that aren't as left-leaning as Virginia.
Pretty much on the money. Donald Trump has made the Democratic Party great again. He's unified it and given it intensity at the polls, much like Barack Obama unified and intensified the Republican Party. Ed Gillespie actually got out the Trump vote. He met all the Trump targets or exceeded them, and it still wasn't enough because he lost women in the suburbs, a huge Democratic feminist surge. And if you look ahead at 2018, those Republican districts that Hillary Clinton won, 23 of them, the House is in play.
Okay, Mark, and I want to switch overseas here, and we saw the president on Russia, his comments on Putin. What do you think about what he's saying about Russia?
Oh, it shows how dramatically the Republican Party has changed. Ronald Reagan, the Republican archetype, the icon of the party, his policy toward Russia was trust but verify. Donald Trump's policy seems to be trust. Hey, listen, Putin said that they didn't do it, so they didn't do it. And by trust, it's trust Putin, but not his own intelligence apparatus. You know, we just had Veterans Day where we celebrated the sacrifices of our veterans. But our intelligence community puts their lives on the line every day to throw them under the bus and call John Brennan, among others, a political hack. That's just unacceptable.
Well, Putin's had that effect on a few presidents, though.
Yes, he has.
Very good.
But nothing like that. Nothing like that. And Matt, last word. You got about 20 seconds. What grade would you give the Asia trip?
So when I was in elementary school, we'd get 2 grades on each course. One was a conduct grade and one was the grade in academics. So it's conduct grade D. I mean, I think his conduct throughout the trip hasn't been helpful at all in any way in America or across the world. Incomplete on his real grade. He hasn't turned his homework in this yet. I was listening to what Kellyanne Conway said, and about what metric would you use to grade him well on this? If you used a job approval, he has the lowest job approval of any president at this point in time. And if you use the perception of other countries, he's dropped 50 points. Our country has dropped 50 points in confidence in our country since Barack Obama.
Thanks very much.
This is an ABC News special report.
Let's get right to the news, though, and we begin with President Trump overseas.
Shortly before we came on the air, the president tweeted out this picture of Air Force One after touching down in the Philippines. Before his arrival, protesters swarmed the U.S. Embassy and were repelled with water cannons.
Quite a scene there. While in the Philippines, Trump is going to meet with the controversial President Rodrigo Duterte, who's accused of ordering illegal killings in that country's drug war. Trump has told Duterte he's doing, quote, an unbelievable job on the drug problem.
The upcoming meeting comes on the heels of Trump walking back comments in which he seemed to side with Vladimir Putin over America's intelligence agencies about the question of Russia meddling in our elections.
It also comes after President Trump ramped up his war of words with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, calling him short and fat. ABC's chief White House correspondent, John Karl, is traveling with the president this morning. John, good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan, and good morning, Sarah. After saying just yesterday that the president, that he thinks that Vladimir Putin truly believes it when he denies that Russia interfered in the election, today the president said that he accepts the findings of U.S. intelligence agencies, which have concluded that Russia did meddle and that it was Vladimir Putin who ordered it. At a joint press conference with the president of Vietnam, President Trump was asked point blank who he believes. U.S. intelligence agencies who say Russia meddled in the 2016 election, or Vladimir Putin, who denies it happened.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership.
The current leadership of the U.S. intelligence agencies have said definitively that Russia did interfere and that Putin himself ordered it. The president says he accepts their findings, but he wants to move on and work with Putin rather than punish him.
What he believes is what he believes. What I believe is that we have to get to work, and I think everybody understood this that heard the answer. We have to get to work to solve Syria, to solve North Korea, to solve Ukraine, to solve terrorism. And, you know, people don't realize Russia's been very, very heavily sanctioned.
Just yesterday on Air Force One, the president said he briefly discussed election meddling with Putin yesterday at a multi-nation summit here in Vietnam. Every time he sees me, he says, "I didn't do that," the president said. And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. That didn't sit well with Senator John McCain, who responded, quote, "There's nothing America first about taking the word of a KGB colonel over that of the American intelligence community." On Twitter, the president defended his comments. When will all the haters and fools out there realize that having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing? From here in Vietnam, the president also tweeted about North Korea, taunting dictator Kim Jong-un, saying, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Oh well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that will happen." The president was asked if he really meant that. Could he become, quote, a friend of Kim Jong-un?
That might be a strange thing to happen, but it's certainly a possibility. If that did happen, it would be a good thing for, I can tell you, for North Korea. But it would also be good for lots of other places, and it would be good for the world. So certainly it is something that could happen. I don't know that it will, but it would be very, very nice if it did.
The president also had some choice words for those who were the top 3 intelligence officials when he became president, calling the former heads of the FBI, the DNI, and the CIA, quote, political hacks. Now, these are individuals who have long careers in national security and have served both Democratic and Republican administrations. Sarah, Dan?
Thank you, John.
This is an ABC News special report.
Some late-breaking developments this morning out of Asia, where the president is on his overseas trip.
Look at this picture of President Trump shaking hands with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Trump says he asked Putin about Russian meddling in the 2016 election, that Putin denied it, and that he, Trump, believes Putin means it when he issues these denials.
ABC's chief White House correspondent John Karl is in Da Nang, Vietnam, covering it all. John, good morning.
Good morning, Sarah, and welcome back. The president says he had in fact 2 or 3 very short conversations with Putin, with whom he says he has a very good relationship. Shortly before arriving in Hanoi, Vietnam, President Trump told reporters aboard Air Force One that he again pressed Vladimir Putin about Russian interference in the election that he won. He said he didn't meddle. Trump said, "I asked him again. You can only ask him so many times. Every time he sees me, he says, 'I didn't do that.' And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. I think he's very insulted by it, which is not a good thing for our country." The latest Trump-Putin encounter took place right after a lunch with the leaders of 21 countries in the Asia-Pacific. Just days ago, the president said he wanted to talk about getting Putin's help dealing with North Korea. But a senior White House official tells ABC News the discussion was mostly about Syria, the two agreeing to commit to a peaceful solution to the country's civil war. Vietnam is the 4th country on President Trump's marathon first trip to Asia. He arrived talking tough on trade.
We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
While in China, the president had nothing but warm words for China's president.
My feeling toward you is an incredibly warm one. As we said, there's great chemistry.
Here in Vietnam, the president announced he would no longer tolerate the kind of trade practices China has long been criticized for.
We will confront the destructive practices of forcing businesses to surrender their technology to the state and forcing them into joint ventures in exchange for market access.
For his part, Putin spoke to reporters after the meeting and said that he complimented Trump, saying he was, quote, a well-brought-up person, comfortable at communicating, but he said that relations between the United States and Russia are, quote, at a state of crisis. Sarah and Dan?
John, thank you.
This is an ABC News special report.
President Trump on the last leg of his tour of Asia, facing backlash from 8,000 miles away. The president shaking hands with the controversial leader of the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte, accused of many human rights violations. President Trump trying to clarify his comments about Russia's meddling in the U.S. election. Whom does he believe, Vladimir Putin or America's intelligence agencies? And all of this coming as the war of words is reignited between the president and North Korea's Kim Jong-un. ABC's chief White House correspondent Jonathan Karl is traveling with the president.
Protesters faced off with riot police today in Manila, carrying signs reading "Ban Trump" as water cannons blasted the crowd. It's the final stop on the president's nearly 2-week-long trip to Asia. At a gala dinner, he toasted the Philippines' hardline president Rodrigo Duterte. In Vietnam, the president met briefly with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He said among the topics they discussed was Russian meddling in the election.
I believe that he feels that he and Russia did not meddle in the election. As to whether I believe it or not, I'm with our agencies, especially as currently constituted with their leadership.
U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia did meddle in the 2016 election and that Putin ordered it. Earlier on Air Force One, the president describes Putin's words this way. Every time he sees me, he says, "I didn't do that." And I really believe that when he tells me that, he means it. He also called the former heads of the top 3 intelligence agencies, the CIA, the DNI, and the FBI, quote, political hacks. Today, the former director of the CIA said President Trump is giving Putin a pass.
I think it demonstrates to Mr. Putin that Donald Trump can be played by foreign leaders who are going to appeal to his ego and to try to play upon his insecurities.
On Twitter, the president dismissed his critics. When will all the haters and fools out there realize that having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing?
We have to get to work to solve Syria, to solve North Korea, to solve Ukraine, to solve terrorism. And, you know, people don't realize Russia's been very, very heavily sanctioned.
He also took on North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, tweeting, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old when I would never call him short and fat? Oh, well, I try so hard to be his friend. Maybe someday that will happen." The president was asked if he really thought he could become, quote, a friend of Kim Jong-un.
That might be a strange thing to happen, but it's certainly a possibility. If that did happen, it would be a good thing for, I can tell you, for North Korea. But it would also be good for lots of other places, and it would be good for the world.
Friends with Kim Jong-un. Okay, we'll have to see if that ever happens. Jonathan Karl joins us now from Manila, where the president is set to have his first formal meeting with President Duterte in a few hours. Human rights groups say the Philippines leader has backed the illegal killing of more than 7,000 of his own people in the country's drug war. Is that likely to come up, John?
White House officials say it will come up, that the